Everything that we create, everything that we manifest, spends a certain kind of energy. It takes thought, it takes attention, it takes movement to bring an idea, a possibility into a probability, into an actuality. There is energy spent in manifesting. And in that sense, you have entropy. You have the slow deterioration and spending of the physical body and its capacities until at one point the energy is spent and the body dies. And the question is, where do we get energy from if everything that we do, if everything that we say, if everything that we're creating is spending energy, investing energy to make a probability actual, a possibility probable? Then where do we renew? Where do we get the energy from? And in the model of open and closed systems, in a closed system paradigm, you would look for the energy to come back from what you created. So, for example, you'd spend your body to dig up tree roots and stumps and plow the field and put the corn, the wheat in the field and water the field and harvest the field and thresh the wheat and dry and grind the corn, and then you put it back in your body. And so in a closed system, you spend energy into the earth, the environment, a project, and then you seek to be renewed. You put energy into a marriage and you seek that marriage to feed you psychologically, physically, sexually, etc. You put energy in, you look for energy back. Now, in this framework of a closed system, there are lots of things that don't give anything back or that don't give enough back to restore, to repay the debt. Here's an investment, but the company went bankrupt. So where does the energy come to in that sense? Do you grind to a halt because I've got nothing left? Or can you renew? And this is where the open system paradigm is, that all systems are interconnected in some way, that nothing is entirely open, that nothing is entirely closed, that those are fictions of language, and that we are innately a part of all that is. And so there was an energy that entered into this body and entered into this form that was fed from outside. And we can touch and tap into that energy, the energy of source, the energy of that which is transcendent, the self that is beyond us ecologically, spiritually, ecologically, and physically, ecologically. We can turn to that. And this is one of the great resources for renewal, for regeneration, for re-energizing the system of the psyche. Solitude, meditation. Now, meditation can be art, meditation can be mulling, meditation can be visualization, but the type of meditation that is most energizing is the ritual of reconnecting with the self. Now, the self and the ego are distinct. The ego is the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that has an identity. I am the one who thinks this and feels this and says this and does that. That's the ego. That's the ego self. But there is also the self that invests energy into the ego self and is there before and after the ego self. That is more of a formless presence. Now, that also has a sense of identity. It's not an ego identity, it's a sense of self. Now, that sense of self is always healthier than the ego and its pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. Because the ego is generally shaped and molded more by the cult in which it was born and the various traumas and mechanisms and programs delivered and infused into the ego, much as a hardware system is loaded up with software and viruses. The ego is very much a response to the cult environment. And so the cult, the culture, is always deeply flawed, always deeply inefficient, always deeply incompetent in many ways. And that's what's delivered as a meme into the ego identity. The self, however, is much healthier, and it is free of the cult, and it is free of the ego. And so it doesn't wear down as much. You have a tremendous resource of energy if you can get in touch with the witness. The one who witnesses the ego is closer to the self than the ego. So this is the whole direction and thrust of Buddhism, to move from the ego identity to the one who witnesses the ego identity as a more deep and authentic sense of self that is not identified with the many programs and viruses that are used to define the I identity, the I pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. So as we deplete, we can go inward and find the one before there is the one, the self before there is a me, that deep, timeless, abundant presence that's always there, watching, often with a little bit of humor, often with a little bit of curiosity, often with just the joy of being. The opportunity to be inside any ego as a multifaceted expression of something bigger than the ego in the large possibility and probability field that is the self.